Another thing I noticed about the scene that you read is this idea that, and this is something that I think we see in historical romance sometimes, the legacy of love, and that the parents had a
Mm.
true love that was broken. And so Mal is kind of processing that and suffering through that. And I guess my question is, you know, was there a lot of intentionality behind that theme?
Part of what I love about this period is just the variety of circumstances and the, the paths to power and the way that your birth defined your class so far. And yet there was so much tension attendant upon those who crossed these borders. So I was really interested in the idea, and this is something we see a lot in a historical romance written in previous centuries and now, this idea of social trespass. I knew he was going to be a bastard. It was going to be important to the story that he wasn't legitimate, but I wanted to think about how a duke's heir, he knew he was going to be a duke. Why would he promise marriage to a woman so far beneath him? She is a haberdasher's daughter, I think is what I made her, or some sort of, genteel but not very rich or lucrative trade. What would have promised her? Why did she believe him? And what happened? Why does she think they were married when, of course, he would never have done that? He wouldn't have had his family's approval. As we find, his father forces him apart. So we actually do see these social climbing marriages, and they created these ripples of gossip and astonishment inside of the era. And I thought it would be just really fun to make that gesture in the book, to work in those realities that families were not nuclear. You had women dying all the time of childbirth. You would often have a duke who had three different wives. It wasn't a big surprise. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
play with that opportunity in the actual historical record.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. It also makes me think of the Prince Regent who, married his love. Well, he kind of blackmailed her into marrying him, and she was Catholic. So it was literally illegal for them to get married, and this was never going to go
Exactly.
forward. And yet they did it.
All of George's children had these clandestine or illegal marriages, almost all of them. Kent's the only one who goes off, and then he doesn't even have a son, he has a little daughter. It's so the family interesting. It's just so it's so productive for fiction writers.
Well, that's a segue into another question I have for you, which is that you write historical romance across multiple eras. You write contemporary romance. You write creative nonfiction. You write creative short stories. So when you're in this world of fiction thinking, what pulls you into a story and what factors help you determine what kind of story it's going to be?
That's a great question. The quick answer is, what is the story I want to tell, and what is the effect I want to achieve? If I want something that I can be more experimental with and I can probe the darker undersides that lends itself to literary fiction, I haven't tackled the literary novel yet. That seems to me like a very intricate sort of thing, but I'm very attracted to the thought, and I'm no doubt going to try one at some point. But recently, I've always had a love for romance. I love reading romance. I love writing romance. I've been scribbling contemporary romances since I was really young. But I'm drawn by the structure of the romance. And I studied this for my PhD, the medieval romance, the earlier antecedents of that, and then the prose fiction that comes after. The themes attracted me. It's love, it's passion, it's adventure. There's always obstacles, there's always reconciliation. And the quest interested me as well. There's the external quest and the internal quest. So when I want to have a story that has those elements, then I think I'm drawn to the novel. I'm drawn to the romance. I save the creative nonfiction for a lot of those everyday life moments where I ask myself, what happened? How do I feel about that? So I write about that. And then every once in a while, I still do some medieval scholarship just to keep the skills sharp because I do love research and I do love analysis. It is actually fun for me. I don't
Well,
know
that's
why.
great. And so, do you think, like a modern day romance reader, if we were able to read medieval language, would we pick up a medieval romance and be like, oh, yeah, this is a romance? Or is it the kind of thing that, you know, has been used as a different word throughout the ages?
When we think about the conventions of romance now, they come very much from the period I'm writing. They come very much from Pamela, Richardson's Pamela, Jane Austen's courtship novels, a bit of the Brontes and their wild Gothic passion and longing. And so those beats of the story are probably more modern. If somebody picked up a medieval romance, and there actually are some, I worked a lot on the tale of Melusine. It was translated into English around 1500, and it's also has a wonderful modern English translation from the French. And if somebody picks it up, they would say, this is so wild and bizarre. Fairies, kings being imprisoned in mountains, curses, women who turn into a serpent from the waist down 1 day a week. And then there are the Crusader romances where you go off and you battle, and there's just so much cultural tension and prejudice that's being worked out there. Thousands of people being slain. There's Geoffrey the Great Tooth, who's a little bit monstrous. There's penitential work in medieval monasteries. There's some elements that are very strange, but the emotion of it, the magic, the mystery, the fantasy, the idea that you can walk into a separate world, the idea that heroes aren't pure, but there's this kernel of darkness in them, I think all of that would appeal. I really do.